It was a cold, crisp autumn morning, the kind that made you want to pull your coat tighter and rush to get inside. At Franklin High, the leaves were scattered across the courtyard, crunching under students' feet as they shuffled towards the imposing brick building. On the surface, everything looked normal, but under the surface, there was a tension that no one really talked about, at least, not out loud. In the center of it all was Maria Lawson, a quiet, studious junior who had the unfortunate distinction of being the principal's daughter. She was average in almost every way. Medium height, long brown hair always tied back in a ponytail, and glasses that slid down her nose as she read her books in the school library. Maria didn't stand out in any way that would make you look twice, but there was one thing that set her apart: her last name. In a school where everyone tried to fit in, Maria had been marked as an outsider from day one. Being the principal's daughter wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with perks, no easy grades or special treatment. In fact, it came with a target. Sarah Matthews, the queen bee of the school, made sure of that. Sarah Matthews was everything Maria wasn't. Tall, blonde, always dressed in the latest fashion. She had an air of confidence that made everyone gravitate towards her, like a planet with its own gravitational pull. People followed Sarah not out of respect, but because she controlled everything. The parties, the gossip, even the teachers to some extent. And Sarah hated Maria, though no one could really say why. Maybe it was because Maria didn't fall in line with the school's social rules. Maybe it was because Maria's father, Principal Lawson, once reprimanded Sarah for cheating on a test. Whatever the reason, Sarah had made Maria her favorite target. It started like any other school day. The halls buzzed with chatter, lockers slamming, footsteps echoing as students rushed to their next class. Maria walked through the hall with her head down, clutching her books to her chest, trying to be invisible. She had learned to navigate school life this way: move fast, stay quiet, and don't give them any reason to notice you. But being invisible didn't always work, not when Sarah had made up her mind to notice you. In the middle of the day during lunch, Maria sat at the edge of the cafeteria, as far away from the popular crowd as possible. She picked at her sandwich while her two closest friends, Amy and Lena, chattered next to her, their voices low. They all knew what was coming. It was only a matter of time before Sarah and her crew would make their presence felt. Just as Maria took a bite, the cafeteria door swung open with a loud bang. Sarah strutted in, her heels clicking against the tiled floor, flanked by her loyal followers, Tiffany and Jenna. The air in the room seemed to shift, as though everyone was holding their breath. There she is, Little Miss Perfect. Sarah's voice rang out across the cafeteria, instantly drawing attention to Maria. Conversations halted, and all eyes turned toward the corner table. Sarah's lips curled into a smirk, the kind that told everyone she was about to put on a show. Amy tensed up, whispering to Maria, "Just ignore her. Don't react." But it was too late. Sarah had already crossed the room, closing in on their table with a predatory gleam in her eye. She leaned against the table, towering over Maria, her eyes glittering with mischief. "So, how's it going being the principal's little pet?" Sarah taunted, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Do you get gold stars for breakfast or just for being a snitch?" The cafeteria filled with muffled laughter. Maria could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she kept her head down, focusing on the sandwich in front of her. She had learned from experience that responding only made things worse. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with silence. She wanted a reaction. In one swift motion, Sarah reached across the table and knocked Maria's tray to the ground, sending food splattering across the floor. The sound of the tray clattering against the tiles echoed in the suddenly silent cafeteria. "Oh no, what a mess. Guess someone needs to clean up. I mean, that's what pets are for, right?" Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel everyone watching, waiting to see what she would do. Her hands trembled as she bent down to pick up the tray, trying to block out the snickering from around the room. She could feel the weight of Sarah's gaze on her, the smug satisfaction radiating from her like heat from a furnace. "Seriously, Sarah, grow up," Amy said, her voice shaky but defiant. Sarah whipped around, narrowing her eyes at Amy. "Oh, look at that. Maria's little friends have something to say. How adorable." But Maria didn't want Amy to get dragged into this. She didn't want to make things worse. Without saying a word, she stood up, her tray in hand, and walked away from the table, ignoring the laughter that followed her out of the cafeteria. After the lunchroom humiliation, Maria retreated to the library, her usual safe space. The scent of old books and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights usually calmed her, but today it did nothing to ease the knot of frustration tightening in her chest. She sat down at one of the back tables, staring blankly at her homework. It wasn't fair. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had tried to keep her head down, tried to stay out of trouble, and yet Sarah had made it her personal mission to destroy her every day. Why? Because she was the principal's daughter. Because she didn't fit into their world. Maria was no stranger to feeling isolated. Her father had always told her that people would treat her differently because of his job. But he didn't understand what it was like inside the school. To him, everything was black and white. Rules were rules, and as long as you followed them, things would be fine. But the unspoken rules at Franklin High were much more complex. It wasn't about what you did. It was about who you were. The library door creaked open, pulling Maria from her thoughts. She glanced up to see Sarah sauntering in, her eyes scanning the room like a predator looking for prey. When her gaze landed on Maria, her lips curled into that same cruel smile. Maria's pulse quickened. Why was Sarah here? What more could she want? Without a word, Sarah walked straight to Maria's table and sat down across from her, as though they were old friends about to catch up. The tension in the air was thick, and Maria's stomach churned. This wasn't about a simple schoolyard prank anymore. There was something darker behind Sarah's eyes today. "You know," Sarah began, leaning in slightly, her voice low, "you could make things a lot easier for yourself." Maria blinked, unsure of what she meant. Sarah's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "All you have to do is stay out of my way. Stop making yourself such a target." Maria clenched her jaw, her hands tightening into fists under the table. For the first time in a long time, a spark of anger flared in her chest. She was tired of being pushed around, tired of being humiliated, tired of feeling powerless. But what could she do? Sarah leaned back, clearly enjoying the moment. "Just think about it, Maria. You're not cut out for this. Stick to your books, be the good little principal's daughter. And maybe, just maybe, I'll leave you alone." And with that, she stood up and walked out of the library, leaving Maria staring after her, heart racing, mind spinning. That was the moment everything changed. Maria didn't know it yet, but the storm was coming, and she was about to become its eye. The following days at Franklin High were a blur for Maria. She went through the motions, attending classes, doing her homework, sitting quietly at lunch. But underneath her calm, composed exterior, something was shifting. She felt a tension she couldn't shake, like a tight coil ready to spring. The confrontation in the library had ignited something inside her, something she wasn't sure how to control. Sarah Matthews wasn't finished with her. Maria knew that much. Sarah was the type who didn't back down until she'd completely crushed her target. And Maria had been on her radar for years. But what started as snide remarks and cafeteria pranks had begun to evolve into something far more insidious. Maria's two friends, Amy and Lena, tried their best to support her, but they were afraid too. Sarah's influence didn't just stop with her tight-knit group of friends. She had a stranglehold on the entire social ecosystem at Franklin High. Most students didn't dare to cross her, not because they liked her, but because the fear of becoming her next target was enough to keep them in line. Even teachers seemed to avoid confronting her. Sarah's father was a powerful businessman in the town, and rumors swirled about how he had contributed to the school's latest renovations. Everyone knew this, so when it came to discipline, Sarah had a certain untouchable aura around her. It was one of the reasons Maria's father, the principal, had always tried to tread carefully around the Matthews family. A bad report or public scandal could make waves beyond the school walls, and Maria felt that pressure every day. As much as Maria wanted to tell her father about what was happening, she couldn't. It wasn't that he wouldn't believe her, but how could she explain the complicated social web without making it sound like she was just whining about high school drama? Besides, she didn't want to put him in a position where he'd have to choose between being a parent and a principal. The last thing she wanted was for her issues to spill over into his career, so she kept quiet. And the bullying escalated. It started subtly, as most bullying does. Sarah and her group, particularly her two sidekicks Tiffany and Jenna, began upping their game. One day, Maria opened her locker to find a pile of trash inside. Old food wrappers, crumpled papers, and a sticky drink that had leaked all over her textbooks. There was no note, no signature, but she didn't need one. The giggling from across the hallway told her everything she needed to know. Maria spent that afternoon scrubbing her locker clean, trying not to let the anger rise to the surface. She told herself it was just a prank, just another way to get under her skin. But deep down, she knew it was a message. Sarah was reminding her who controlled the school. A few days later, during biology class, Sarah made another move. The teacher, Mrs. Whittaker, was distracted at the front of the room, going over a lesson on genetics. Sarah leaned over, whispering to her friends, eyes flicking toward Maria. There was something about their laughter that put Maria on edge, but she tried to focus on the assignment in front of her. Then she felt it, a sharp tug on the back of her hair. Before Maria could react, a wad of gum landed in the middle of her ponytail. Her stomach sank as she reached back to feel the sticky mess tangled in her hair. A wave of laughter erupted from Sarah's side of the room. Tiffany was covering her mouth, barely able to suppress her giggles, while Jenna tried to act innocent. Maria's face burned with humiliation, but she didn't make a sound. Instead, she stood up, excused herself to the bathroom, and spent the next 20 minutes trying to get the gum out of her hair. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But each time, Maria could feel the walls closing in a little more. The isolation, the humiliation, it was wearing her down, bit by bit. The bullying situation was beginning to reach a breaking point, and not just for Maria. Other students had started noticing what was going on, but most were too scared to speak up. Tommy, a quiet boy who sat near Maria in English class, had tried to intervene once before when Sarah made fun of Maria's glasses. Sarah's response: she spread a rumor that Tommy had a crush on one of the teachers. The gossip spread like wildfire, and by the end of the week, Tommy had become another silent observer, too embarrassed to step in again. Then came the parent-teacher meeting, where things took an unexpected turn. Maria's father, Principal Lawson, called the meeting to address concerns about rising behavioral issues in the school. He had noticed the tension among students, though he hadn't yet connected it to what was happening to his own daughter. The meeting was packed with concerned parents, many of whom had heard whispers of bullying, but hadn't wanted to get involved. Sarah's parents were there too, sitting at the front of the room with an air of superiority that made Maria's skin crawl. Her father, Mr. Matthews, shook hands with the teachers, flashing a smile that oozed confidence. He donated thousands to the school every year and made sure everyone knew it. The meeting began innocuously enough, discussions about grades, extracurricular activities, and the upcoming school dance. But halfway through, one of the parents, Mrs. Cartwright, a mother of a freshman, raised her hand. "What are we going to do about the bullying in this school?" A murmur went through the crowd, and Principal Lawson glanced down at his notes, clearly caught off guard. "We have policies in place," he began, "and any reports of bullying are taken seriously." But Mrs. Cartwright wasn't satisfied. "That's not good enough. My son comes home every day talking about how kids are being picked on. I hear things, rumors about certain students being untouchable. If something doesn't change soon, I'm pulling my son out." The room went silent. The comment was a thinly veiled jab at Sarah and her clique, though no one dared say it outright. Mr. Matthews shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but remained silent, a thin smile playing on his lips. He knew his family's influence, and so did everyone else in the room. Maria sat in the back, her heart pounding. She felt a mixture of guilt and anger. Guilt because she knew she wasn't the only one suffering, and anger because it felt like nothing would change. Her father, though he meant well, seemed more concerned with keeping the peace than addressing the real issue. After the meeting, Maria overheard snippets of conversation from the parents as they filtered out of the room. Some were angry, demanding action, while others shrugged it off, saying it was just kids being kids. The divide was clear, and it mirrored the one in the school. Those with power stayed silent, while those without it were left to fend for themselves. The next day at school, Maria walked the halls with a growing sense of dread. The tension between her and Sarah had reached its peak. The silent war that had been brewing for years was about to explode. Sarah wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. It was during an all-school assembly, a routine event meant to celebrate the school's academic achievements, that things took a dark turn. The gymnasium was packed, students crammed into the bleachers, murmuring to each other as they waited for the principal to take the stage. Maria sat near the back, trying to disappear into the crowd, but Sarah wasn't going to let her. As Principal Lawson began his speech, praising the students for their hard work and dedication, Maria felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around to see Sarah, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Before Maria could react, Sarah pulled something from her bag, a photo. It was an edited, humiliating image of Maria, altered to make her look ridiculous, like a caricature. Sarah had distributed copies to her friends, and soon they began passing them down the rows. A ripple of laughter spread through the gymnasium as students began to see the image. Maria's stomach twisted into knots as she realized what was happening. Her father was still speaking at the front, completely unaware of the humiliation unfolding behind him. As the photos made their way down the rows, Maria felt the sting of betrayal. Even students she didn't know were laughing, joining in on the joke without a second thought. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her feet were glued to the floor. Every muscle in her body tensed, fighting the urge to scream or cry. It was in that moment, as she sat frozen in her seat, that Maria made a decision. Enough was enough. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for months, years, even, finally boiled over. She wasn't going to be silent anymore. She wasn't going to be Sarah's victim. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. Without thinking, Maria stood up. Her knees wobbled, her hands shook, but she didn't care. She marched toward the front of the gym, toward the stage where her father was still speaking, oblivious to the chaos behind him. The whispers followed her as she walked, the laughter dying down as students realized something was happening. The entire school turned to watch as Maria did the unthinkable. The gymnasium fell into a stunned silence as Maria walked purposefully toward the stage, her legs trembling beneath her, but her mind locked in a singular focus. Every whisper, every laugh seemed to echo in her ears, but she didn't turn around. The image of the caricatured photo was burned into her mind. The years of being Sarah's target, of feeling small and powerless, had all led to this moment. Her father, Principal Lawson, stood at the podium, unaware of what was unfolding behind him. He was finishing up his speech, smiling proudly as he addressed the students and staff. But all the eyes that should have been on him were now locked on Maria as she approached the stage, her heartbeat pounding in her ears like a drum. Sarah Matthews, sitting in the front row with her clique, tilted her head in amusement, a smirk playing on her lips. To her, this was just another victory. She had humiliated Maria yet again, in front of the entire school no less. She leaned over and whispered something to Tiffany, who stifled a laugh. Maria reached the steps of the stage and paused for a moment, her hand gripping the railing. Her breath came in shallow bursts as a wave of anxiety crashed over her. Was she really going to do this? She glanced around the gym, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. But instead of fear, something else took hold of her, a sense of clarity. She had nothing left to lose. This was the moment that would change everything. Maria stepped up onto the stage, interrupting her father mid-sentence. Principal Lawson looked down at his daughter in confusion, his voice faltering. "Maria, what's going on? Are you okay?" But Maria didn't respond. She wasn't here to ask for permission. This wasn't about following the rules anymore. She walked past him, grabbing the microphone from the stand. Her father reached out as if to stop her, but something in her expression made him pause. He knew his daughter, and the look in her eyes told him that something had changed. The crowd murmured in confusion, whispers spreading like wildfire across the bleachers. Even Sarah's smirk had faded slightly, her posture stiffening as she realized Maria wasn't backing down this time. Maria's voice came out shaky at first, but as the words tumbled out, she found strength she didn't know she had. "You all think this is funny, don't you?" she began, her voice echoing through the gym. "Humiliating people, making them feel small. You think it makes you powerful." The gym went eerily silent. Students exchanged glances, unsure of what was happening, but no one dared to speak. Maria scanned the crowd, her eyes locking briefly with Sarah's. The smirk was gone from Sarah's face now, replaced with something that looked like mild disbelief. "I've been the target of Sarah Matthews and her friends for years," Maria continued, her voice growing steadier. "Every single day, it's been something new. Gum in my hair, trash in my locker, rumors spread behind my back. And you know what? I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet because I thought if I ignored it, if I didn't react, it would stop. But it didn't." Maria's hands shook slightly as she gripped the microphone, but she kept going, the words flowing out now like a flood breaking through a dam. "Most of you don't know what that feels like, to be singled out, to be the one that everyone laughs at, to have people you don't even know join in on making your life miserable because it's easier than standing up to the person in charge." The students were transfixed, their usual chatter silenced by the weight of Maria's words. Even the teachers, who usually would have stepped in by now, sat frozen in their seats, unsure of how to handle this unexpected outburst. Maria turned to her father for a brief moment, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "Even you didn't see it, Dad. And I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to have to choose between being my dad and being the principal. But it's too late for that now." Principal Lawson's face paled, his eyes wide as he realized the gravity of what Maria was saying. He had known something was off, but he hadn't understood just how bad things had gotten. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, he saw not just his daughter, but a student who had been suffering under his watch. Maria turned back to the audience, her gaze locking on Sarah once again. The air between them felt electric, charged with years of unspoken resentment and unacknowledged pain. "And then there's Sarah," Maria said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "Sarah Matthews, the queen of Franklin High. The girl who thinks she can get away with anything because her daddy writes a check every year. The girl who made it her mission to make my life hell." Sarah shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't used to being called out, especially not in front of the entire school. For the first time, she looked unsettled. "You think you're better than everyone else, Sarah. You think you're untouchable." Maria's voice grew louder, fiercer. "Well, I'm done letting you control my life. I'm done being your punching bag. And I'm done letting everyone else sit back and watch like it's some kind of joke." The tension in the room was palpable. Students sat on the edge of their seats, waiting for what would happen next. Some of them looked uncomfortable, others intrigued, but no one was laughing anymore. Maria took a deep breath, her hands still shaking as she continued. "This isn't just about me. This is about every single person in this room who's ever been bullied, who's ever felt like they weren't good enough because someone like Sarah decided they weren't. This ends today." For a moment, the gymnasium was completely silent. Then something unexpected happened. From the back of the bleachers, a voice spoke up. "She's right." Heads turned, searching for the source of the voice. It was Tommy, the quiet boy who had once tried to stand up to Sarah and been ridiculed for it. He stood up slowly, his face pale but determined. "I've seen it too. Sarah and her friends. They'd been doing this for years, and no one says anything because we're all scared. But it's not right." A murmur spread through the crowd. A few other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at each other as if debating whether to speak up. Then another voice joined in. "I'm sick of it too," said Emily, a girl from the sophomore class. "They treated my friend the same way last year, and she ended up leaving the school because of it." One by one, students began to stand up, their voices rising in agreement. Maria's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The tide was turning. Sarah's reign of terror was finally being called out, not just by her, but by the very people who had been too afraid to speak before. Sarah's face was a mask of disbelief. She stood up abruptly, glaring at the students who had spoken. "Oh, come on, really? You're all going to side with her. She's just jealous because she's a nobody." But the more Sarah spoke, the weaker her argument sounded. The students weren't backing down this time. The fear that had once kept them silent had been broken. Principal Lawson stepped forward, his expression serious. "That's enough, Sarah." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "What? You're going to take her side now, just because she's your daughter?" "This isn't about sides," he said quietly but firmly. "This is about accountability. I should have done more. I should have seen what was happening, but that doesn't excuse your behavior." For the first time, Sarah looked genuinely scared. Her power, which had always seemed so absolute, was crumbling before her eyes. The assembly ended in a flurry of confusion and whispers. Principal Lawson called an emergency meeting with the teachers, and Sarah was escorted out of the gym by the school counselor. Word spread quickly that disciplinary action was being taken, and Sarah's father, Mr. Matthews, was notified. By the end of the day, the news had spread across the entire school. Sarah Matthews, the untouchable Queen Bee, had been suspended pending further investigation. It was a decision that shook the entire student body. For years, Sarah had ruled Franklin High with an iron fist, but now she had been dethroned. Maria walked out of the gym feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. She had done it. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had exposed the truth. But the victory felt bittersweet. She had lost so much in the process, her sense of safety, her belief that keeping quiet would protect her. Still, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe again. The days following the assembly were a whirlwind. Franklin High was abuzz with gossip and speculation. Some students were relieved that Sarah had finally been called out, while others worried about the fallout. Would things really change, or would another bully simply take Sarah's place? Maria noticed a shift in how people treated her. In the days following Sarah's suspension, Franklin High seemed to stand still, caught in the eye of a brewing storm. The fallout from Maria's public stand reverberated through every classroom, every hallway, and every whispered conversation. What had once been an ordinary school filled with cliques and unspoken rules had transformed overnight. Maria's actions had set off a chain reaction, and everyone, students, teachers, parents, was trying to figure out what came next. Maria, too, found herself in unfamiliar territory. The quiet girl who had once slipped through the cracks was now at the center of attention. But this time, the gaze of her peers felt different. No longer did she feel like an invisible target, a ghost in the crowd. Now she was seen. People were paying attention, not just to her, but to the issues she had exposed. But with visibility came pressure, and Maria was starting to feel the weight of what she had set in motion. The first few days after the assembly were strange for Maria. She walked the halls of Franklin High with an almost surreal sense of detachment, watching as the social order of the school reshuffled itself. Sarah Matthews had been the queen of the school for so long that her sudden absence left a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Students who had once feared or admired her were now testing new allegiances, trying to figure out where they stood in this new landscape. But Sarah's loyalists weren't about to give up their power without a fight. Tiffany and Jenna, the two girls who had always flanked Sarah like loyal bodyguards, tried to pick up the pieces of their fallen queen's reign. They walked the halls with a forced sense of bravado, whispering about Maria behind her back, attempting to rally the remnants of their social group. But it was clear that the dynamic had shifted. Without Sarah's dominating presence, their influence had waned. The students who had once followed them out of fear or the desire to fit in were now questioning whether they wanted to be associated with the group at all. Some of the more neutral students, like Emily, who had stood up for Maria during the assembly, found themselves with new social clout. Emily, who had always been in the background, suddenly became a voice for change, encouraging others to speak up about their own experiences with bullying. She and Maria hadn't been particularly close before, but now they found themselves sitting together at lunch, their bond forged in the fires of shared struggle. But not everyone was supportive. While Maria had gained new allies, she had also made new enemies. Sarah's suspension didn't just remove a bully from the school. It ignited a debate that divided the student body, and soon after, the entire town. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some students said that Maria had overreacted, that she had made a mountain out of a molehill. Others whispered that she had used her father's position as principal to get back at Sarah. The most extreme rumors suggested that Maria had planned the whole thing from the start, manipulating events to take Sarah down. The town of Maple Grove wasn't immune to the gossip either. Franklin High had always been a reflection of the town's social dynamics, and Sarah's father, Mr. Matthews, wasn't just a powerful figure in the school. He was a major player in the local economy. His construction company had built half the businesses on Main Street, and his donations to the school were well known. Now that his daughter had been publicly shamed and suspended, there were whispers that Mr. Matthews was looking for someone to blame. Maria felt the ripple effects in her own life. Her father, Principal Lawson, had become the target of backlash from certain parents. Some believed he had shown favoritism to his daughter by suspending Sarah without a thorough investigation. Others thought he had been too lenient in allowing the bullying to go on for so long in the first place. He found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending both his role as a principal and his role as a father. At home, the tension was palpable. Conversations with her dad became stilted, as though both of them were dancing around the elephant in the room. Maria knew her father was under immense pressure, and part of her felt guilty for what had happened. She had never intended for things to spiral out of control, but now it felt like the storm she had unleashed was beyond her ability to control. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table in silence, Maria finally broke down. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her father looked at her, his expression softening. He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers. "I know, Maria," he said quietly, "but sometimes the truth has consequences. And as hard as it is, I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes, but she blinked them back. It feels like everything's falling apart." Her father sighed, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his own responsibilities. "Change is hard, and it's messy. But the way things were, it couldn't go on like that. What you did took courage, and now we'll have to deal with the aftermath." A week after the assembly, rumors began swirling that Sarah Matthews would be returning to school. The news sent shockwaves through the halls of Franklin High. Sarah's suspension had been brief, but it was long enough to make her absence felt. Now the question on everyone's mind was how she would react when she came back. Maria, for her part, had tried to mentally prepare herself for the inevitable confrontation. She knew that Sarah wouldn't simply slink back into school and pretend nothing had happened. That wasn't Sarah's style. Sarah was the type who thrived on control, and losing that control had likely enraged her. The day of Sarah's return arrived with an almost electric tension in the air. Maria noticed how the other students seemed to be walking on eggshells, their eyes darting nervously toward the entrance, waiting for Sarah to make her grand re-entrance. When Sarah finally walked through the doors, she was met with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She looked different, more composed than anyone expected. She walked with her head held high, flanked by Tiffany and Jenna as usual, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She didn't look angry. She looked calculating. Maria had expected an immediate confrontation, some sort of showdown in the hallway or cafeteria, but that didn't happen. Instead, Sarah walked past her as if Maria didn't exist. It was disorienting, to say the least. The girl who had made it her life's mission to torment Maria now acted as though she wasn't worth her time. But Maria knew better than to let her guard down. For the next few days, Sarah's behavior was uncharacteristically restrained. She attended classes, participated in discussions, and interacted with her friends in a way that almost seemed normal. But the tension between her and Maria simmered just below the surface, unspoken but palpable. The entire school could feel it, like a storm waiting to break. Then the real war began. It started small. A few nasty rumors spread through the school like wildfire, rumors that painted Maria in a bad light. They were subtle at first, whispers that she had lied during the assembly, that she had exaggerated Sarah's bullying to get attention. Some students started avoiding her again, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. They didn't want to get involved in whatever was brewing between Maria and Sarah. But things escalated quickly. One day, Maria found her locker vandalized, spray-painted with cruel messages and symbols. The janitor cleaned it up by the end of the day, but the damage was done. Everyone knew it had been Sarah's doing, even though there was no proof. The next day, Maria's social media accounts were flooded with hateful comments from anonymous profiles. The messages were vicious, filled with personal attacks and threats. It was clear that Sarah had taken the fight online, where she could wage her war from behind the safety of a screen. Maria felt herself unraveling again, the walls closing in. The pressure of being constantly watched, judged, and attacked was taking its toll. She had thought that standing up to Sarah would put an end to the bullying, but now it felt like it had only made things worse. Sarah was more dangerous than ever, and she was using every tool at her disposal to make Maria's life miserable. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, an unexpected twist threw the entire school into chaos. One morning, an anonymous email was sent to every student and staff member at Franklin High. It contained screenshots, videos, and chat logs, evidence of Sarah and her friends bullying multiple students over the years. The email exposed everything, from their cruel pranks to their manipulative schemes. It was all laid bare for the entire school to see. Maria stared at the email in disbelief. She hadn't sent it. She didn't even know where most of the screenshots had come from. But there it was, a digital paper trail of every horrible thing Sarah had done to her and countless others. The school was in an uproar. Students and teachers alike were shocked by the revelations. Many of Sarah's former friends and allies distanced themselves from her immediately, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. The email had hit Franklin High like a bomb, exploding in ways that no one had anticipated. It was as if someone had torn open the fabric of the school's tightly wound social hierarchy, leaving all its ugly inner workings exposed for the world to see. The screenshots and videos were undeniable. There, in full color, was Sarah Matthews orchestrating and carrying out years of manipulation, bullying, and cruelty. It wasn't just her attacks on Maria. The evidence stretched back farther than anyone had realized, implicating other students who had long since left Franklin High. As the school's administration scrambled to address the mounting allegations, Sarah's carefully curated reputation began to disintegrate in real time. The once impenetrable Queen Bee was now the subject of rumors and ridicule herself, and for the first time in her life, Sarah Matthews was on the receiving end of the very treatment she had doled out to others for years. Franklin High's administration wasted no time launching a formal investigation. Sarah was called into the principal's office, this time with a different kind of attention. Gone were the days when Sarah's parents could smooth things over with a hefty donation. The email had made it impossible for anyone to turn a blind eye anymore. Maria watched from afar as the drama unfolded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also disbelief. Was it really over? Could Sarah Matthews truly be dethroned this easily? It felt too good to be true. After years of torment, watching Sarah finally face the consequences of her actions seemed almost unreal. And yet, it was happening before her eyes. Within days, the administration made an announcement. Sarah had been suspended again, but this time, it was indefinite. Not only that, but she and several of her closest allies, Tiffany and Jenna included, were now under investigation for cyberbullying, harassment, and other serious misconduct. The police had even been contacted, as some of the harassment crossed into legal territory. The town of Maple Grove, which had always seen Sarah as one of its shining stars, was in an uproar. Parents demanded answers. Mr. Matthews, once a towering figure of influence in the town, was suddenly facing a PR nightmare. His daughter had become a symbol of everything wrong with the school, and there were whispers that his company might suffer as a result. The Matthews family, who had once been untouchable, now found themselves on the defensive. As for Sarah, her return to Franklin High was unlikely. Word spread quickly that she would likely transfer to another school, perhaps even leave Maple Grove entirely to escape the scandal. Her reign as Queen Bee had officially come to an end. But the real story wasn't just Sarah's fall from grace. It was the tidal wave of change that her collapse triggered. In the weeks following the scandal, Franklin High underwent a transformation. The administration, keen to avoid further criticism, began implementing new anti-bullying measures. Workshops on digital citizenship, kindness, and mental health became a mandatory part of the curriculum. The school counselor, who had once been seen as more of a formality, now had a line of students outside her door daily. But perhaps the most significant change was in the students themselves. Inspired by the exposure of Sarah's actions, students who had once stayed silent began to speak up. People who had been bullied, marginalized, or silenced started sharing their stories, some publicly, others privately. Maria wasn't the only one who had been a target of Sarah's cruelty. She was simply the first to say it out loud. One afternoon, Maria was approached by Tommy, the quiet boy who had stood up during the assembly. He had been keeping to himself since that day, but now there was a new confidence in his step as he came up to her at lunch. "Hey," Tommy said, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot. I wanted to thank you. For everything." Maria looked up from her lunch, surprised. "Thank me? For what?" "For standing up to Sarah. For showing us that we don't have to take it. I've been thinking about everything, about how I've let people push me around, and I don't want to be that person anymore. You showed me that." Maria blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. "I didn't really do much," she said, though her heart swelled at his words. Tommy shook his head. "You did. More than you know." As Tommy walked away, Maria realized something profound. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. What she had done, standing up to Sarah in that gym, refusing to be silent, had sparked something much bigger than just one bully's downfall. It had inspired others to reclaim their voices, to fight back against the toxic culture that had allowed bullying to thrive in the first place. Amidst all the chaos and change, there was still one mystery left unsolved. Who had sent the email? Maria hadn't done it, though the timing and content of the email had been perfect for bringing Sarah down. She had no idea who had collected all that evidence or who had the technical skills to send it to the entire school without getting caught. One evening, as Maria was packing up her books in the library, Emily approached her, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Hey, Maria," she said, her voice casual, but her eyes twinkling with something mischievous. "Hey," Maria replied, smiling back. Emily had become one of her closest friends since the assembly, their shared experience bringing them closer. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Emily said, lowering her voice as she leaned in. "That email. The one that exposed everything. I know who sent it." Maria froze, her heart skipping a beat. "You do?" Emily grinned. "It was me." Maria's mouth fell open. "What? How? Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't want to take the credit," Emily shrugged. "It wasn't about that. It was about getting the truth out there. I've been collecting evidence on Sarah and her crew for a while now. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but after the assembly, I knew it was time to act. I just didn't want anyone to know it was me. I thought it would have more impact if it came from Anonymous." Maria stared at her in awe. "I don't even know what to say. That email, it changed everything." Emily nodded. "I know, and it needed to. People like Sarah, they count on no one speaking up. So I spoke up. But you were the one who gave me the courage to do it." Maria's heart swelled with gratitude and pride. Emily had risked a lot to expose Sarah, and she had done it not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. "Thank you," Maria whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Emily smiled and squeezed Maria's hand. "We're in this together." As the weeks turned into months, Franklin High gradually settled into a new normal. The school wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but the atmosphere had shifted. The fear that had once permeated the hallways was gone, replaced by something new: hope. Maria, once the target of relentless bullying, now found herself in a position of quiet influence. She didn't seek attention, didn't try to become the new queen bee, but her actions had earned her a level of respect she had never imagined. People listened to her now. They looked to her as someone who had stood up when it mattered. But Maria didn't let the attention change her. She focused on her friendships, on her studies, and on building a future for herself that wasn't defined by the past. She and Emily grew closer, their bond deepened by the shared experience of taking down Franklin High's most notorious bully. They formed a small group of friends, people who had once been on the margins, but were now united by their shared commitment to making the school a better place. And as for Sarah Matthews, she never returned to Franklin High. Her family quietly left Maple Grove at the end of the school year, relocating to another town where no one knew her name or her history. For all her power, for all her wealth and influence, Sarah had been brought down by the very people she had underestimated. The quiet ones, the outcasts, the nobodies. In the end, it wasn't Maria who won. It was the truth. Months after Sarah's departure, Maria stood in front of the school's gym once more, but this time it wasn't for an assembly. It was for graduation. The air was warm, and the sun shone brightly through the large windows as students filed into the gymnasium in their caps and gowns. As she stood in line, waiting for her name to be called, Maria reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful day. She had never set out to be a hero. She hadn't wanted to change the world. She just wanted to be free, from fear, from bullying, from the weight of Sarah's control. But in standing up for herself, she had sparked something much larger than she ever could have imagined. And in doing so, she had learned something invaluable: that one voice, no matter how small, could make a difference. As Maria's name was called, and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the applause felt different this time. It wasn't just polite. The applause that filled the gym was louder than Maria expected. It wasn't just the obligatory clapping that greeted every student as they crossed the stage. There was something different in the air, a sense of acknowledgement, respect. She felt it as she made her way across the platform to Principal Lawson, her father, who handed her the diploma with a proud, teary-eyed smile. He had been through a lot himself during this entire ordeal, both as a father and an administrator. But in this moment, all those challenges seemed to melt away. As Maria's hand closed around the diploma, she caught sight of Emily and Tawny in the audience, their faces beaming with pride. Behind them were other faces, people who had once ignored her, ridiculed her, or stayed silent when they should have spoken up. Now those same faces were smiling, not just because of the shared milestone of graduation, but because they understood that this wasn't just any graduation. It was a victory, one they had all shared in. Graduation marked the end of an era, but it didn't erase the scars of the past. The fallout from Sarah's reign lingered in subtle ways. The students of Franklin High were changed, some for the better, some still grappling with the implications of what had transpired over the last few months. Tiffany and Jenna, once Sarah's loyal lieutenants, had kept their distance since the email scandal. Both had been implicated in some of the worst incidents of bullying, but unlike Sarah, they hadn't left town. They stayed, completing their final year in a kind of self-imposed exile. Their former clique had disbanded, and the social power they once wielded had evaporated. Maria saw them occasionally, walking through the halls like shadows of their former selves. They didn't look her way, didn't try to stir up trouble. It was as if they had finally understood what they had lost, not just their social standing, but something deeper, the respect of their peers. But the school's transformation wasn't limited to just those involved in the scandal. Other students had also been changed by the events, some in ways they hadn't expected. Mason, a popular jock who had once been one of Sarah's casual followers, had been one of the first to publicly apologize after the email was sent. He stood in front of the school during morning announcements, his voice shaking as he admitted his part in standing by while others were hurt. "I didn't do enough to stop it," he had said, looking directly into the camera as the entire school watched from their classrooms. "And I'm sorry. I'm going to do better." It was a moment that stunned everyone, but it set the tone for what would follow. Mason wasn't alone. Several other students came forward, admitting their own complicity or ignorance, vowing to be better in the future. It was a catharsis Franklin High hadn't known it needed. For Maria, watching all of this unfold was surreal. It felt as if she was witnessing the school exercise years of built-up toxicity, piece by piece. But there was still one final chapter left in her own story. What came next? The weeks following graduation passed in a blur. Maria had a hard time adjusting to the sudden quiet after the chaos of her final year. With school out and Sarah gone, the town seemed strangely peaceful. She spent a lot of time reflecting, not just on what had happened, but on what it meant for her future. She and Emily spent many afternoons together, lying in the grass at the park or sitting by the lake, talking about everything they'd been through. Their friendship had deepened in ways Maria hadn't expected. They had become each other's confidants, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears for the future. One afternoon, as they sat on the docks by the lake, Emily turned to Maria, her face thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if none of this had ever gone down? Like if you hadn't spoken up at the assembly?" Maria thought for a moment, the ripples on the lake mirroring the ripples of her thoughts. "I think about it all the time. Part of me wonders if I would have just kept my head down, tried to survive until graduation." Emily nodded. "But you didn't. You spoke up. And now, look at everything that's changed." Maria smiled, but there was a shadow behind it. "Yeah, but I wonder if things really changed for the better. I mean, Sarah's gone, but there are still people out there like her. People who won't think twice about using their power to hurt others." Emily stared at the water for a moment before responding. "Maybe. But what you did wasn't just about Sarah. It was about showing people that they don't have to stay silent, that they can fight back." "I guess," Maria said softly. "I just hope it sticks." As the summer wore on, thoughts of the future began to dominate Maria's mind. She had always planned on going to college. But now, with everything that had happened, her priorities had shifted. She no longer saw college as just another step on the path of life. It had become something more, a chance to redefine herself outside the confines of Franklin High. Her acceptance letters had come in. She had several options, including some prestigious schools that had offered her scholarships. But Maria wasn't sure if she wanted to leave Maple Grove just yet. As much as she wanted a fresh start, there was a part of her that felt unfinished here, like she still had work to do. One evening, Maria sat at the kitchen table with her father, the pile of acceptance letters spread out in front of her. "I don't know what to do, Dad," she confessed. "I feel like I should go. I mean, this is what I've been working toward, right?" Principal Lawson looked at his daughter with the same quiet understanding he had shown during the entire ordeal. "You've been through a lot this year," he said softly. "No one would blame you if you needed more time to figure things out." Maria sighed. I don't want to make the wrong decision." Her father leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the table. "There's no wrong decision, Maria. Whatever you choose, it'll be the right path for you. You've already proven that you can handle more than most people ever could. Whatever you do next, you'll make it work." Maria smiled at him, appreciating the support, but the weight of the decision still pressed down on her. One evening, as Maria and Emily sat by the lake, the idea came to her like a flash of lightning. She had been thinking about everything: the bullying, the aftermath, the school's response, the students who had come forward. And then she realized there was still so much work to be done. "What if we started something?" Maria said suddenly, her voice excited. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Started what?" "A group," Maria said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "A support network for students who've been bullied, not just here in Maple Grove, but everywhere. Like an online community where people can share their stories, get advice, and support each other. Something that can reach beyond just one school." Emily's eyes lit up. "That's actually brilliant. We could create a platform where people feel safe to speak out, like what you did at the assembly, but on a bigger scale. We could offer resources," Maria continued, her mind racing with possibilities. "Articles, videos, maybe even workshops on how to deal with bullying, how to stand up for yourself. And not just for students, parents, and teachers too." Emily was nodding enthusiastically now. "It could be huge. Think about how many people out there feel like they don't have a voice. We could give them one." Maria felt a spark of energy she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since the chaos of the last year, she had a clear vision of what she wanted to do next. College could wait. There was something bigger at stake here. Within weeks, Maria and Emily had begun building their platform. They called it Voice Up, a nod to the act of speaking out that had sparked everything. At first, it was just a small website with a forum and a few resources they had gathered on anti-bullying strategies. But as word spread, the platform grew. Students from all over started joining, sharing their own stories of bullying, of standing up to it, of surviving. Teachers reached out, thanking them for providing a resource they could recommend to their students. Even parents got involved, eager to learn how they could better support their children. Voice Up became more than just a support group. It became a movement. Maria and Emily began organizing virtual events, bringing in speakers, therapists, educators, even former bullies who had turned their lives around. They offered advice, shared strategies, and provided hope. The website expanded, incorporating videos, articles, and live chats. It wasn't long before they were featured in local news, and then national outlets picked up the story. Maria found herself at the center of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. And the best part,